Hey everybody, this is Kevin Carr from Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning and Movement is Medicine, and I want to make a quick video to talk about hamstring rehabilitation. One question I always get is, what exercises and what progressions are you using when rehabbing athletes from hamstring strains? And while every injury process and every athlete is unique, so their program is going to be unique to them, there's some major exercise and progressions that I'm pretty much always doing to try to restore capacity and bring athletes back to peak performance. So I wanted to use this video to go through some demonstrations and provide some explanations as to why I use these progressions in our training and rehabilitation programs. All right, so before we get into the actual exercises, I think we should cover some basic progression principles to help you understand where I'm coming from and why I'm choosing the exercises that I'm choosing. As fitness professionals and rehab professionals, there's some basic progression principles we need to understand that should guide a good rehab or performance program. So I'm going to bring up this chart here, as you can see, and these are some things that guide all the programs that I build and all the programs that we build as a staff at MBSC. We're typically always going to be working from unloaded to loaded progressions, so starting with things like body weight or even negative body weight using something like a shuttle and moving towards loaded progressions, allowing the athlete and the tissue to adapt. We're typically always going to move from slow to fast, going from isometrics or slow static movements towards dynamic movements, moving from the strength portion to things like plyos and sprinting. And in rehab, that's especially important because we want to build capacity under slower conditions before we move to faster conditions. We're typically moving from supported variations to unsupported variations. This is especially important when we're working with athletes coming back from an injury. They might need some sort of support like a TRX or a stick to help them before they can start to move to regular body weight variations without support. We're typically moving from low volume to high volume. We want to assess the athlete's tolerance at a lower volume and then slowly add in volume as they show that they can take that volume and recover in between training sessions and in between training bouts. We're typically moving from low frequency to high frequency. That could be exercises over the course of a program or workouts over the course of a week. And then we're moving from full recovery to partial recovery, and this means for things like energy system and sprinting, we're going to want that athlete to have full recovery early on in the training program to make sure they can recover adequately and restore and maintain form throughout some sort of conditioning bout, and then moving towards conditioning with less recovery as they start to move along in their rehab or in their performance program. It's important to understand these principles. As boring or as benign as they might seem, they're going to be the foundation of a successful program, whether that's in rehab or in performance training. So kind of keep these in mind as we go forward and when you're building your training and rehab programs as a whole. The first exercise we're doing here is the 90-90 breathing drill. And the purpose of this exercise is to teach the athlete to get their pelvis underneath them and get co-contraction in the obliques and hamstrings. The next exercise we're doing is the bilateral hip bridge. This is a great early introduction to strength training. It's a good way to test the tissue tolerance, especially following an injury. We want to see that the athlete can actively extend their hips bilaterally, using their hamstrings, glutes, and obliques before progressing them further on. The next exercise I would go to, once they show me they can master the bilateral hip lift, is the unilateral hip lift. So naturally, we're just progressing from more support to less support and adding more load on the hip and the hamstring. We're beginning to build basic, static, isometric, and concentric tolerance in the tissue. Following success with bridging, I might move towards some basic dynamic locomotion like marching. This is going to prepare us for skipping and sprinting practice and allow us to assess the dynamic stretch tolerance in the tissue. As the athlete is beginning to gain strength and progress through the program, I'm going to start including dynamic warm-up drills like skipping, high knee run, butt kick, straight leg walk, all these drills that begin to put some more dynamic stretch to the tissue and ultimately move them towards the ultimate hamstring rehab, which is sprint training. Around this time, the athlete should also be progressing in the weight room, moving from things like bridging, which are a little bit more static, to moving to exercises that have more of an eccentric demand. So enter the eccentric slide board leg curl, where the athlete's going to bridge their hips up and have to slowly eccentrically extend the leg and stress the hamstring eccentrically while maintaining hip extension through the glutes and maintaining pelvic position through the obliques. This is important to begin stressing the hamstring eccentrically, as that's often where it fails during a hamstring strain. From here, we're just going to simply bridge to a concentric and eccentric variation, stressing the hamstring eccentrically and concentrically, while also stressing the obliques and glutes to maintain pelvic position and hip extension. From there, once the athlete shows progression, we can begin to move to single leg progressions to really stress and bulletproof the hamstring against future hamstring strains. It's key here to really coach the pelvic and lumbar position of the athlete so we're not having them compensating into the extended position that often led them to this hamstring strain in the first place. So it's really key to coach pelvic position during this hamstrings drill. Additionally, we're also going to begin introducing externally loaded hamstring and glute exercises like the single leg deadlift. I don't think there's much of a better externally loaded exercise to develop the hamstring and glutes for sprinting and hamstring rehab than the single leg deadlift. Now, ultimately, the goal in hamstring rehab is to get back to running. So we're going to use things like tempo runs and then eventually move towards acceleration and high speed sprinting to bulletproof those hamstrings for sports.